Welcome, fans, to a special edition of the Old School Shooters podcast. My name is Jack Kilby, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling, and we are very pleased to have the legendary Taskmaster Kevin Sullivan on the program tonight. But before we get to Kevin, I must comment on the second man in the three-man booth that we usually have, and that would be the King of Connecticut, looking very Sinatra-esque tonight. King, how are you, sir?
You know, you got to see the shoes, kind of like Ric Flair used to do. You got to see those shoes. You know, if your father was wearing shoes like this growing up, you probably have siblings you don't know about. You know, these are styling and profiling shoes. So it is a pleasure to be on with Kevin. I haven't seen Kevin since he was down here in Florida, and I joined the Army of Darkness with Big Drew, Andrew Anderson. We had a great time there in Daytona Beach last year.
Sure did, my man.
And in honor of Mr. Sullivan, having some Irish blood myself, not too far removed from St. Patrick's Day, I'm going to put a little Jameson in my coffee here. I've got my coffee here. We'll turn that into an Irish coffee tonight for the show.
Before we get into that, King, I want to know, because you mentioned Flair and your shoes. Do those shoes cost more than my house?
You know it, brother. You know it all night long, Daddy-O. Woo! You know it.
Do you want to begin the discussion with Mr. Sullivan then, King?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I had the absolute pleasure of being on Kevin's show, a guest on Kevin's show last year, the show that he did with Big Drew, Andrew Anderson, and Matty Rock, and got a chance to go on there and talk about some old school stuff and about the old school book that his wife wrote. That was pretty awesome and right in line with the show that I created here for the Hannibal TV, the Old School Shooters. And man, I want to just kick it off with Kevin to talk about a subject he talked about on that show, on that episode, which was his time coming into the business and shooting with Mike Graham, being Old School Shooters. And as he starts to tell you that, I'm going to go run and grab a stogie.
Yeah, well, what it was is in Florida, you had to know how to wrestle. You know, it's a whole different. I mean, it's not even apples and oranges. It's rocks and fruit. You know what it is today. And if you were in Florida, first of all, you couldn't ride. You couldn't be seen anywhere with a heel if you were a babyface. And if you ever got in a fight down there at a bar, you had to win, or you go home and pack your car up. So the guys would work out in amateur wrestling. And I worked out Mike, I worked out with Steve Kern, Gerald Briscoe. A lot of the guys worked out just to stay in shape. So it was, the University of Tampa didn't even have a wrestling team until Eddie Graham supported the team, bought all the mats, and he brought the first national amateur collegiate championships to Florida and paid for everything. So it was a very important thing back then. Not so much now.
Yeah, you know, Kevin, we had a guy on the show in Old School Shooters named William Harding, not the president, but the wrestler, and he was the only guy to get paid with Bob Roop's Sugar Hole challenge. And man, he was a great guest. Rugged times there in Florida. Young Terry Bollea had his leg broken, when he tried to break in the business and down here in Florida as well. And Eddie Graham is credited for a lot of the reason why Florida is a strong amateur wrestling state now, because of his philanthropy.
Yes, yeah, he supported all that. He brought it, like I was saying, he brought it to Florida. I mean, yeah, and where did that guy get out of the sugar hold? Where was he?
Man, he wasn't even in Florida. And I'll defer to my co-host here, Jack Kilby, because we had him on for a whole episode. He was up in, isn't he from Kentucky, Jack, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, he was at a show in Kentucky that he was.
Harpo's in.
William Harding was his name, and he broke out of it after doing some training in martial arts. And he was a slight individual at the time, and he said that his flexibility was part of the key for him to get out of that hole.
I knew.
Well, he was a wrestler and a judoka.
Yeah, no, it didn't matter. I knew what you were going to say, that he was slight. Because the thing is, the bigger you want, once you wrap that around, your neck can get into the armpit. If you can't get deep enough in that armpit, like, I don't think you put that on a woman. So that's how he got out of it. The guys that used to go in for the challenge were all big guys, thought they could, So yeah, that's amazing. How the business has changed, huh?
Oh, yeah. He told the story to us about the guys that came before him, and they were all bigger guys. Exactly. And him being small. And talking about an old school guy, man, one of my mentors that you and I had talked about that, Hannibal was asking about Mark Lewin. And one of my mentors that, and coaches and a guy that I used a lot of his lower body submissions in MMA and in training MMA guys, was a guy that gave me this robe. Take a look at this, guys. Look at that. Look at that robe. Handmade robe. You see the camels. The great Mephisto, Frankie Cain. Yeah, and Kevin, do you have any thoughts on the great Mephisto?
Oh, he was terrific. Frankie was a wonderful performer. And, Frankie had boxed in carnivals and wrestled in carnivals. Frankie was a tough guy. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And Frankie had a submission that he used. That was a shoot submission that he used on bigger guys. And even when I was way down in Fort Walton, he was a much older man. He's still alive, actually. Scott Teal did a book with him. Reach, a lot of people don't realize he's still living. He's very reticent, laid back. He doesn't do shows like this. But
how
Frankie,
old would Frankie be?
Frankie's in his 80s now. And he was probably got to be 85. I was down at his place. Billy Wicks, who was one of like a second father to me, the old pops, Billy Wicks was very close to Frankie, and he had set me up to go down and stay at Frankie's house in Fort Walton. This was back in like 2007, I think. So 16 years ago, and Frankie was already in his 70s at that point, like early 70s. But Frankie was a wild man. He owned gentlemen's clubs down there, and he used to do the mud wrestling shows at the strip clubs. He was a fun guy, man. Wow. Hell of a fun guy. Even then, even at 70 or early 70s, whatever he was at that point, he was a wild guy and a fun guy. And Hannibal told me to ask you about some of the crazy times in the 1980s. Partying in the pro wrestling world.
Oh, it's like a rock and roll show. You know what I mean? The guys were working every day. It was brutal. But Frankie has been there for how long? Fort Walton Beach.
Fort Walton, the funny thing about Frankie, he'd probably kill me if I said this, because when I was down there, now this was, again, 15, 16 years ago, he told me, "You don't tell anybody where I live." He said, "You understand me, kid? You don't tell anybody where I live or what I'm doing." And he'd probably be pissed off that I'm telling now. I don't know if he's still down there in Fort Walton, but this was quite a while ago. That's why I said, man, he was a really, private, reticent guy. But he's been down in Fort Walton for quite some time. As far as I know, he may still be down there. But a hell of a guy, and like I said, he had some really cool shoot submissions, like you said, for coming out of the carnies that he used to beat bigger guys with. And he had a couple of lower body submissions that I still teach, fighters to this day. But what an awesome guy, man. You talk about old school. Old Frankie was as old school as it gets. Hey, that's just one of the robes he gave me. I've got all his robes, and I did a Sheik gimmick back then, and he gave me his robes and cut some promos with me, and I had a great time. Getting to know him, the old timers. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this show, Kevin, is to kind of honor the old school and honor the old timers in pro wrestling.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Kevin, you spent a lot of time in the 70s and 80s wrestling in what was reputed to be, the most dangerous place on the planet, that being Miami, Florida. And you wrestled there regularly. Do you have any recollections of the way in which the scene was there in terms of that element of danger, or is that just overblown through the lens of history?
That was like going to the library compared to going to the Bahamas. As dangerous as Miami was nothing like going to the Bahamas. I mean, they built, first of all, it was an outside, I believe at one time it was a roller skate rink outside, but it had walls. And the walls were probably 12 feet high, but what they did on top, when they built the walls, they broke glass bottles and cemented them into the top of the roof, right? Those people would sit up on those glass bottles. And we'd sell out every time we went to the Bahamas. And, we've all heard the legendary stories of Haku and Ming, right? Well, they had this little dressing room that was like a tool shed, but it wasn't a tool shed. They had cleaned it up, and it was like a little boxing gym they had in there. And they had built us a fence, a chain link fence, to get to the ring. But nobody thought about, when we were running through the gate, that they would stick their umbrellas through and get us. Well, before they got the gate up, why they put the gate up, Haku was coming back from a match one time, and a guy that was sitting on the roof of the boxing gym that we were getting dressed in took a cinder block and nailed him in the head from the top. He went down to one knee, but he didn't go down. He got back up, and that scared everybody. So they built us the thing, but they would still get us. In Miami, it was tough too, but nothing like the Bahamas.
Let me ask Jack. Jack, have you ever been to the Bahamas?
No, I can't say that I have. I do frequent many Caribbean countries, that's for sure, and it's on the bucket list, but not as of yet.
Let me tell you, when you first land in the Bahamas, my experience was you meet your cab driver, and your cab driver is the pimp and the drug dealers on the island. And they also con you, because when I landed in the Bahamas, I was supposed to be chauffeured, supposed to have car service, right? And they all pretend like they don't know the car service. And then the cab driver comes over and like I say, he's the drug dealer and the pimp, on the island. It's a wild place, and all those islands, fun place. But I want to ask Kevin, what do you think that the big topic that everybody's talking about now, and Jack and I did a show on it, I don't know if you had a chance to listen to the show, is the merger, the WWE UFC merger, which I personally think is a natural. They're both roots of the same tree. What are your thoughts? And have you followed that story?
Yeah, I mean, what did they said that WWE is worth 21 billion rather?
I think it said 9.3 billion, right?
No, it was 21 billion, wasn't it? Or
It-
11 billion. 11. It ended up being 22 billion, right? One was
It-
Go ahead, Jack.
it was in and around 9 to, I believe, 12 billion for the WWE alone.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I don't know how you can say that's not a bad deal, right?
Oh yeah, it's a great deal, and
Yeah.
it's going to be great for both, for both companies, for both brands. The synergies are amazing, and it's an exciting time. And being old school shooters, if you go back and you study the history, and I know I gave you a signed copy of my Rough and Tumble book that followed the roots of the tree. They're both roots of the same tree.
Yeah, but I think that here's what I thought about. Now you can bet on wrestling, correct?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, I can't really say. Jack knows this. I'm doing involved right now with attorneys for some lawsuits, and let me just say that UFC, and I'm going to leave it at this. After I say this, I'm not going to get into the weeds. UFC in certain eras was a lot more like WWE than people think in that regard. I'll just drop that. Do a mic drop on.
Oh, yeah, but I think everybody's aware of that. But how do you? I mean, every boxing match has not been on the level. You know what I mean? We all know that. But how do you bet on something that's prearranged, told it's prearranged? I think that WWE is coming out of this smelling much better than UFC.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's a great deal, and Vince is staying on right there with Ari. And when Jack and I did our show last month during with the John Jones fight, the night after that, I was at a dinner with these attorneys, and we're a fighters' rights organization, and basically these suits that they've been very cooperative with Endeavor, but they relate to the brain trauma. And I was at a dinner with Ari, Ari Emanuel, who is now going to be right there with Vince. I think he's going to be the head of this new WWE UFC merged corporation, and he's more of a pro wrestling fan than he is an MMA fan. Ari.
Well, it's going to be interesting. We'll see.
Harkening back, Kevin, to your experience with the Steiner brothers, Rick Steiner has been in the discussion lately regarding an incident with a fan fest, and not to pick that apart, but in terms of your thoughts on working with the Steiner brothers, and especially Rick in the varsity club, do you have any? Do you have any thoughts on that era of your career and Rick at that particular point in time?
Yeah, it's probably one of the fondest times of my career, but it didn't last long enough. I had Dr. Death, Mike Rotunda, Rick, Dan Spivey for a while. So I had a lot of great guys, but it didn't last. For some reason, Herd wanted to pull the plug. But I mean, to watch Rick come into his own was fabulous.
I loved it, man. Rick Steiner, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, and even more so than Scott. I loved and still love the dog face gremlin. But you mentioned Dan Spivey. And he on The Undertaker did a interview with Mike Tyson on Mike Tyson's podcast, and Dan was talking about Dan on Dale Mabry in down in Tampa back in the old days. And actually, I was on the podcast of a guy who was involved in organized crime in Tampa at that time. He's now since gotten out of that, but he knew Dan Spivey too. Dan was the man down there. He was running a lot of the girls. Talk about, old school. He was running a lot of the ladies of the night, and he was a really feared guy in Tampa down in Dale Mabry before he ever got into professional wrestling. Talk about Dan Spivey, and then I want to circle back to Rick Steiner as well.
Yeah, well, I didn't know anything about that on Dan's past, but I knew he was a great collegiate football player. Him and the late great Scott Hall came in the business as a tag team. Very tough guy, very nice guy though, very nice guy. Everybody loved Dan. I mean, he had that wicked left hand, so I can imagine people in Delaware, Mabry, and Tampa surrounding would have been afraid of Danny.
Yeah. There's that infamous story of him with Adrian Adonis, cleaning Adrian's clock, and that's been told to Hannibal right here on the Hannibal TV. I was actually with Hannibal years ago when he was down here in Florida. I was one of his guests and on his trip, and then the next day he was over at Dan Spivey's house. He's got a beautiful home. He's here in Florida. He's done really well. And another guy that's done really well outside of wrestling too, Rick Steiner, the dog-faced gremlin. I had the pleasure of going to the Shoney's when Scott had the Shoney's there in Georgia. And I don't think he has that restaurant anymore, but he was a restaurateur for a while. But the Steiners, they're Midwestern wrestlers. They're out of University of Michigan. They're Wolverines. We on Old School Shooters were a little more partial to the Spartans, the Michigan State. We just had Corinne Jacobs, the captain of Michigan State Spartans wrestling team, a good friend of mine and co-host of my old podcast on the show. But I've always had great respect for the Steiners and the University of Michigan, and I absolutely loved that varsity club, man. That faction. That's one of everybody talks about. They talk about the Horsemen and the NWO, but that varsity club faction back in the day was fantastic.
Dusty came up with that. It was a great, and I wish it could have continued for longer. Yeah.
Kevin, I wanted to ask you a question, just shifting gears in terms of the recent WWE Hall of Fame. I'm wondering if you heard that the great Conan referenced yourself in his induction speech of Rey Mysterio, and specifically a conversation that he supposedly had with you where he was trying to sell Rey to you in WCW, and basically you sort of, according to Conan, gave an ultimatum that if you'll give him a tryout match, but if he doesn't get over, you'll never take a recommendation from him again. And of course, you or someone paired him with Dean Malenko, and the rest is history. When I heard that, I was curious to get your take on that version of events.
Well, I'm not sure if I would have said that, but I might have said it ribbing. And he's built up a story for Ray, but I mean, Conan deserves a lot of credit because once I saw Ray, I brought them all in. I was the first guy to feature the Luchadors, and I brought them all in. But if Conan said it makes the story better good,
Did you at the time when you were, of course, and we talked about this a little bit in your previous interview with myself on the Great North Wrestling podcast, which the fans can find on this channel. Did you at the time realize what a revolutionary move it was to take the Luchadors and feature them so prominently during what will be no doubt the most hot period of the business has ever seen? Did you realize that at the time?
Yeah, I did, because it was the way I looked at it, Vince was selling automobiles. We were going to sell Harley Davidsons. There's two. They're both vehicles, but two different vehicles. But I knew once the people saw the Luchadors exposed, it would just. And then I had the major stars from New York, and I had great talent, and I knew they had gotten stale. It was the new kid on the block with a fresh product. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, Kevin, I've got to interject on this, man. I told Jack this story. It's kind of funny. First of all, I absolutely loved you and Hands of Stone Ron Garvin back in the day in the studio matches were my favorite because it was so physical. You went in there and you wrestled those guys and you tore them up. And I love that. I liked Ole Anderson as well. And just a lot of those studio matches. But you had a promo, man. I'm going to take fans back in time. Fans that might have silver in their hair and might be old enough to remember this, or no hair. You had a promo that you did about Dusty Rhodes and the Four Horsemen. That was epic. And it was about the Four Wolves and the Jackal. And you talked about Singapore. Do you remember that one, man? That was an awesome promo.
No, I don't. I wish I did. Yeah.
Oh, man, you talked about it. And I can almost do the promo because it's crazy that I still remember this one because I'm going to tell why I remember it and what I relate it to. That's a kind of a funny story. You said how you were in Singapore and they would bet on fights with animals, and you saw this jackal, and the jackal that was being surrounded by these four wolves, and how the jackal tore the wolves up. And you related that to being the jackal, of course, Dusty Rhodes, and the horseman, you know, and it was right after, if fans probably remember this, it was right after Dusty Rhodes had his eye assaulted with the spike. And fans remember that by the Road Warriors, man. Yeah. I'm taking, people way back in time. This was probably what would that be, Jack? You're a wrestling historian, like the mid 80s?
88 before Dusty jumped to
you hit it right on the head, Jack. 88.
Wow. So I'm going to tell a funny story. So this was not quite that long ago. It was around 2007, 2008. I was a divisional director for a group of breweries. And the guy who brought me in, I'd been with a distributor in Connecticut for 9 years. And the guy who brought me into the company, who was our sales director, got pushed out, in this merger. And I thought about your promo, but I was in a roundtable discussion in Burlington, Vermont. But I didn't cut your promo on him. I tweaked it a little bit. And I was talking about my buddy who'd left, who'd been forced out of the company. And I said, I want to tell you guys, a story about these wildebeests and how they came after the lion and how the lion showed them why he was the king of the jungle. And I said, Ken ain't here, but you're looking at your new lion. Because Ken was my buddy, and this was a very tumultuous time in the company. And everybody was like, what the hell? Because they, kind of took them off their game, in a business sense, in a boardroom. So you could use the pro wrestling, the psychology. These guys were already kind of thought I was crazy and scared of me anyway, because one of the breweries, Pyramid, was sponsoring me because I had won a state championship in grappling tournaments, and I was going to a regional, and they made this robe for me. So they all thought I was nuts anyway. And when I delivered that promo, I called Ken right away afterwards, and he said, make them shit themselves. He said, use everything. He goes, those bastards, they screwed me. And Ken's, he's an older guy. And
let me interrupt, please.
Yeah.
Are you going to be up there in May 6th, Bubba? You coming up?
I'm not going to be. I wasn't invited to this one. I think Jack is going to have me up at the New York one or possibly at the next one. but I'd love to get up there for Great Northwest. I was supposed to come up to the last show, but that one was canceled.
Jack, why don't you tell him what he's missing?
Well, he's gonna miss one heck of a card on the 6th of May at the Earl Armstrong Arena in Ottawa, Ontario, and it is headlined by the almighty Blood Hunter, the diabolical Blood Hunter, managed by the Games Master, Taskmaster Kevin Sullivan against Cowboy James Storm. And that's going to be one heck of an encounter. And it's just the tip of the iceberg. A lot of the fans are excited because, Kevin, I think this is your first Ontario appearance since WCW, if I'm not mistaken, and there's quite a bit of interest in a meet and greet with yourself too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I mean, I thought you were coming up. You're the king of Connecticut, brother. So we'll make sure you come up the next time. And that isn't the only card that's going to be running there. That isn't the only match. We got a bunch of great matches. And I mean, I know James Storm. Wasn't James Storm a former NWA heavyweight champion? So, I mean,
TNA, yeah.
Yeah, and this is going to be a very, very strong card. And
it sounds like an awesome show. You know, the last time I was in Canada was back in the day. I mentioned Burlington, Vermont, when you didn't need a passport. You could just go right across.
Yeah.
And we used to go to Montreal. I love Montreal. How far is this from Montreal, Jack?
About an hour and a half away. We're in the nation's capital of Ottawa.
Is Ottawa the capital? Aren't there two Canadas? Isn't Canada split with French Canada and?
No, it's one Canada.
No, we're a single country with our proud province, La Belle Province of Quebec, being one of our provinces. But just while I have a second, Kevin reminded me to talk about a couple of the other matches. The Canadian heavyweight champion Jeremy Prophet will be facing the Greek god Papadon for the strap, who is a very accomplished wrestler. Also,
past guest here on Old School Shooters.
Past guest on Old School Shooters. He's wrestled in AEW, and so has Prophet. That's going to be a barn burner. But one of the matches that I'm also very excited about is the Great North Wrestling mainstay Wes Briscoe, whose dad, of course, has also been on Old School Shooters. He'll be facing a young man who's making quite a name for himself in the business by the name of Magnum McLaren. He is also a generational star, and that's going to be a barn burner, plus many, many, many other matches. But a lot of the fans are talking about the return of the Blood Hunter and the tutelage services of Kevin Sullivan.
Yeah,
it's going to be a bloodbath. I believe it's going to be a bloodbath. And I got to ask you, Jack, though, to backtrack, I never understood this. Why does Canada have two flags?
Well, we don't. We have the red and white maple leaf, and provinces and territories have their own flag. The fleur de lis is.
What about the flag? Wait, let's go back to professional wrestling here. What about the flag that the fabulous Rougeau brothers would bring to the ring in the WWF, Jack?
That's the fleur de lis, which is the province of Quebec, their flag. And Jacques Rougeau, of course, trained Devin, Hannibal Nicholson, and has been a guest on several interviews on this channel. So shout out to Jacques and continued success with his endeavors in the province.
I got a question, Jack, for you. Who is your favorite Canadian pro wrestler of all time?
Is that a trick question, or should I?
Just a question. I'm just wondering.
I would say without a doubt, in terms of his accomplishments and skill and everything, that would be one Bret the Hitman Hart.
What about Kevin? What about you? Your favorite Canadian professional wrestler of all time?
The Blood Hunter, without any question.
That's the right answer. I'm surprised you got the wrong answer there, Jack. It's the Blood Hunter.
Hey, listen, guys, I gotta run out and pick up my daughter. You can edit this, right, Jack?
Yes, sir.
So
You can edit it, but we'll sign you off because I like to sign it off real quick. We're gonna sing you our theme song real fast.
Okay.
It'll only take a minute.
No, but I want to talk to Jack for a second. Hey, Jack, are you going to make some pictures up for the meet and greet?
Oh, you bet.
Okay.
We've got a full slate of pictures ready to go, sir.
And I'll come in, like I said, on Friday. It shouldn't be but a 3-hour trip, I think. Maybe 4. But, like 9:30, 10 o'clock, 10, and then the first flight out Sunday.
Yeah, we'll work those details out tomorrow, Kevin. Thank you again for coming on Old School Shooters. It's been a chaotic podcast, as we're known to have.
Yeah, I loved it.
Silver Sages spreading knowledge to the younger ages.
Okay.
Old School Shooters, baby. Thank you to the legendary Kevin Sullivan. We've been to town. Beyond the boulevard and down the beach. And we've learned some things that only time can teach. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Jack Kilby here, Executive Vice President of Great North Wrestling. No Gimmicks Entertainment is pleased to present Great North Wrestling's huge 15th anniversary show on Saturday, May the 6th at the Earl Armstrong Arena in Ottawa, Ontario. Bell time 7 p.m. This stacked card will feature former TNA Impact World Heavyweight Champion Cowboy James Storm, WCW legend The Taskmaster Kevin Sullivan managing the diabolical Blood Hunter, second generation former TNA star Aces and Eights Wes Briscoe, Canadian champion Black Dynamite Jeremy Prophet, and former GNW Women's Champion Jessica Black, the Conspiracy Horsemen of Ayatollah Bin Hameen and Greek god Papadon from Vince Russo's brand, Ottawa wrestling legend Bruiser, with much more to be announced. Fans, there will be a meet and greet before the event and at intermission. Tickets now on sale, available at ticketweb.ca and at the door. Don't you dare miss it.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV for instant updates.